So today, till now we have already seen how TestNG used to work, how we can add a plugin to Eclipse, the TestNG plugin to Eclipse, and how the behavior changes of a class with simple methods if we provide some annotation. And we have seen how this test annotation works. If we give the test annotation to a method, TestNG understands this method to be a test method. That we have seen, and we have run the code, we have seen the reports, we have seen most of the things till now. Also, we have understood how this assert method works, and we're going to we basically check the values from expected value and the actual value. We're checking that. If that is perfect, the test passes. Otherwise, if we find any issue in the assert method, like if that no equal, not equal, or there is some difference between the actual and the expected, and still that is not as per the method what it says, the assert equal says both the things should be equal. Okay, then it gives some error, and it says that the assertion failed because the actual and the expected are different, and it gives this message. If we want, this message is optional. If we don't give this message, it's still going to work. Okay, so that's what we have seen till now. We have seen the @test annotation. There are even more methods available with TestNG. So for example, we have a method which is called before class. Okay, so what does this annotation mean, and where should we write this? Let me give you one example. Suppose in this calculator application test, you can see we are basically testing the calculator app, right? And in this calculator app, we are basically calling different functionality or different functions of this calculator method, calculator app class or calculator app object. So what happens when we try to call a method of calculator app? We need to create an object. So this is how we create the object with the constructor, the default constructor of calculator app. Now this object is created again and again in every test cases. So over here we have calculator app. In the second method we also have calculator app creation, object creation. So somehow we are getting some redundancy in the code. Okay, so we may not be needing this object again and again. So what we can do basically is we can cut this object and we can make it public, right? So here I have made the method public, so I don't need the method the class object creation over here. So I can make the object creation public so that all the methods in the same class, they can have access. Okay, so over here I have not defined any type for this object, so it is a default type. That means any class or any interface, any class which is created within this package, they can basically access this calc reference, okay, or the object that is created, they can make use of that. But the thing is that I may not be wanting this object to be created for everyone, or I may not want this object to be created initially, or like it should not be available all the time. Okay, the creation of any object in Java, it consumes memory. Okay, it takes some processing. So what we want is anytime a method is called, or when I am going to test the test cases which are written, or the test methods which are written within a class, before running any of these methods, so before running at least one of these methods, so initially I want this object to be created. As soon as the class is created, or as soon as the instance of the class is created, I should have the object ready. So what I can do basically is I can write an annotation in TestNG which says before class. So any methods within the class are going to be called before that I'm going to create the object of calculator. So before class I need to import, I can use control space, and it's going to import from, there are two options you can see, org.junit or org.testng.annotation. So both the annotations are equal, but the first one that belongs to JUnit, as we are not using JUnit, we are using testng, so you must be importing it from org.testng.annotations. So what we need to do, we need to double click over here, and that is imported. You can see org.testng.before annotations.before class. Fine. Now before class, what we want to do, we need to write a method public void initialize. Okay, this is the method which is going to initialize anything that I want to initialize. So what I want to create, I want to create an object of calculator. So how I can write? I can write it over here. Initially the object is not going to hold anything. By default the object will be null. Okay, And this object, I can make it private. I don't want others to access it, but the class members, the different class methods, they can access it. That's the reason I have made it private. It will be hidden from outside, but within itself it's going to be accessed. Now when the class object is created, it's not going to be initialized at that point of time. But when I'm trying to call the methods, maybe a test method or second test method, whenever I'm trying to call the method, at first it is going to call this method once. This method is going to be called once for the entire class. Okay, so how the flow is going to be? Earlier it used to be starting with all the test cases, test case 1, then test case 2, it will go on like that. But now it will first come to the before method, it will create the object, it will make ready everything so that I can run the test cases, then it will start executing the tests. Similarly, after running all the tests, you might want to free up some of the resources which you have taken. Okay, while running the test cases, we might have taken some of the resources, so we might want to free up those resources. I'll give you some examples. Say for example, if you want to test the database, okay, suppose you want to test some functionality in which you need to connect to the database. Now database is a resource which is limited, like you cannot have a lakh or 2 lakh connections at the same time to the database. Connection as in 2 lakh different users or 2 lakh different basically way to communicate to the database. We cannot have 2 lakh different objects at the same time. So any resource or any object we create to connect to the database, that should be freed up, that should be removed once we are done with that object. So once we are done working with that object, we should let that object go, okay, so that others can use that object. So to do that, we have another annotation which runs just after all the tests are executed. So we can call that after class. So after class is just the opposite of before class. In before class, this method is executed just once before the entire class test cases are executed. After class annotation gives you the way to call the method just after all the tests are executed. So how are we going to import it? We can use control space, or we can put our mouse on that, or we can use control and 1. It will say us okay, let's import it after class, use control space, and it is going to give us these two ways. We need to import it from org.testng.annotations. Import it. Now we are going to write public void free of resources, any name we can give. And over here we're not using up any resources, basically we're creating a calculator object, right? So let's do one thing. The object which is created is still referenced by the CALC reference, right? And at the end I want to remove that, so I can write CALC equals null. So basically it is freeing up the space, or I can even write, I can give a cout message that test execution is complete. Fine. Otherwise, similarly, I can give a message just when I am starting with the test case execution. Starting. So these are the two annotations which are going to be run just before and after the test cases are run. So now let's run the code with the help of TestNG annotation that I have with my Eclipse TestNG plugin with my Eclipse. So let's right click, run as a TestNG test. So once it is run, we can look into the console and we can see how many times these things are run. So let's go to the console and see what has happened. So this is the first sysout. It says test execution is starting. Then one of the test cases is getting executed. That the sum value, actual sum is 7, and it says the actual difference is 10. Test execution is complete. So this is the last value. So this is the first test cases sysout. This is the second test cases sysout, and you can see this is executed initially before class annotation. At the end, this is executed at the end. That is called after class execution. Okay. Now these are the two annotations which are run before and after only once within the class. Now suppose I want something, I want to check anytime I want to do something, some sort of action just before any test case is executed. So there are two test cases in this class, or two test methods, test calculator add and test calculator sub. Suppose I want to run something, I want to make certain things sure that just before running any of the test cases, just running before, I want to do something. So that is going to be before each and every method. So I'm going to give it a name that's called as before method, or I can after, if I want to run anything just after the method execution is complete, I can give it an annotation called after method. So let's give that annotation at the rate before method. Again, we need to import it from testng, and using control space it is automatically imported org.testng.annotations dot before method. So I'm going to write some code, public void before each method. So it is going to be executed 2 times, because just before test calculator and it's going to be executed, and just before test calculator subtraction it's going to be executed. So let's give it a sysout before method. Similarly, I can have another annotation that's called as after method. After method, and this time I'm going to import it from testng. It's automatically imported. I can call it after method. After a method. So now the code is ready. Now what is going to happen? First of all, it's going to execute the class before class. Then it's going to execute a test case, but it found that okay, there is a before method. So it will execute before class, then before method, then a test annotation, and after that the after method. Again it will go to the second test case, and before running second test case it's going to execute the before method, then the test case 2, then after method, and at the end it's going to execute the after class. So this is how it's going to run. So let's look at the output. Let's first run this code, right click, run as testng test. Okay, let's look at the console. Now the console says test execution is starting, and this is the test case execution output, and before that we have a before method getting executed. After the test case execution it is having an after method. Similarly, for the second test case it has a before method and an after method, and you can see this test execution is starting is called the before class, that is executed only once even if there are 2 test cases, and test execution is complete. This is the after test, after class, that is executed only once after both the test cases are complete. So we can have n number of test cases, and the before method is going to be called that many times as the number of test cases. Similarly, the after test method, after method is going to be called that many times as we have the number of test cases or test methods. But the test before class and after class are going to be executed only once for a class. Hope that is clear. Do you have any doubts?